Hey, it's Tim here. This is my Tableau Keynote Summary for 2025 in Sandiego. And as you can see, I'm in a different place because I'm actually here in person for the first time in a long while. This is going to be my Keynote Summary. It's going to be the briefer of the longer videos that I do, just going over the keynote and some of the big highlights. Look out for some other videos later this week and next week on devs on stage and some of the other reflections on Tableau Conference. As ever, let's get stuck in. Now, going into this conference, there was obviously a lot of anticipation about how Salesforce would respond to some of the community sentiment over the last month. There have been several videos, most notably the initial video I made on Whiplash, and then following that, just a couple of weeks ago, another video called The Elephant in the Room. And a lot of people asked me immediately after the keynote, hey, Tim, do you think the keynote responded to some of the concerns you had in the conference? And actually, if you'd watched the Elephant in the Room video, my general message in that was that that was actually going to be a hard thing to do. It was going to be hard for Salesforce to respond to all of those concerns. And instead, what we did see, I think, in the Tableau keynote was a recognition of the key messages that Salesforce needed to answer. So I'm about to break that down now. Let's have a look at the overview and we'll go through some of these points as we go through. Look out for the timestamps below. You'll see them all laid out. So you'll see sort of different notes that I'm going to hit on. But as ever, we're going to try and keep this as brief as possible. If this is as long as the keynote, then I've not done a good job. Let's go into the first section, which was the introduction to the conference. So as it's become pretty familiar, the keynote opens up with Ryan walking on, the CEO of Tableau, essentially introducing the room and doing the usual thanks and gratitude to the community. This is sort of broken down in two steps. Firstly, there's a call out of all the different activity happening throughout conference. We had a good call out for devs on stage, which is going to be today, Wednesday. We also have Iron Viz today, which is it's a great sort of event that happens towards the end of the middle day. It used to be probably the third day in the bigger conferences. Then we have Data Night Out as well. Then we had a call out to some of the key highlights, the key messaging and sponsors that were at the event. And as has become customary over the last few years, there was then a pivot to the community, most notably the data fam, as Tableau like to call it. For this, what they typically do is they do two things. They talk about the product Tableau Public, then they also talk about the different roles in the community and the different people who contribute to the community. So we started first with a big call out for Tableau Public, all the different sort of milestones that Tableau Public has hit. We also talked a little bit about user groups, and then we moved to the other core members of the community. So Tableau visionaries, ambassadors, user group leaders, and Tableau conference first timers. This is a nice sort of spread of different experience levels of the Tableau community. And there's a little bit of a celebration in the room, getting everyone to stand up that sat in those respective groups. I really like this. It's a good way of sort of creating a nod to all the people that give a lot of energy to the community, but don't necessarily get much recognition. This is really their moment. And then Salesforce would do this sort of smooth transition where the first thing they do, they talk about their core values. This is pretty much in every keynote, so you just have to get used to the first sort of 10 minutes of a keynote to know this is always going to be there. And that naturally transitions to a section about doing well and doing good, where Salesforce talks about generally how the business is doing over a period of time and celebrating this concept of 1-1-1 that Salesforce has, where 1% of equity, 1% of time, and 1% of product go back into the world. And so this is always a nice message to see, and it's good to see them continue to do this. It's always hard sometimes to break this down and to be specific about what's coming from Tableau. I'd love that sort of breakdown in the future because I think this is more of a general Salesforce celebration, but I'd love it to be more specific so that the Tableau community and Tableau customers could get better context as to what they've actually done in terms of this sort of impact. And then they transition to this look back at Tableau going all the way back to 2003. This was really just a stage setter. What Salesforce always do with these talks, they sort of do the celebration in the beginning, and then they set the scene for the discussion that's about to happen. And this was an interesting one. I thought this was going to go somewhere completely different, but in essence, they went back to Tableau 1 and they showed us the very first version. I actually believe Tableau 1 was not the first version of Tableau. I think it was a different product called Solaris. That was actually Tableau for, let's say, version 0. But nonetheless, it was good to see Tableau here, Tableau version 1. And it was also nice to sort of see a nod back to the future. But what then happened is we moved on to this point around change. Ryan used this as an opportunity to really double down on this idea that, look, so much has happened since the very first version of Tableau, and there's actually been an evolution of change all the way through. And we're actually seeing another sort of era of change now. Now, in the past, what they've done is they've called these sort of different ways of analytics. This conference felt like a more mature understanding of how to communicate that message. So previously, they've called this the fourth wave. And the thing about the fourth wave is that it made sense because we were talking about sort of an anticipation of change. Now we're in that middle of change. I think they needed to describe that change in a much, much clearer way. And they basically framed it around AI and the opportunities that it represents. But the really nice thing here was that they really responded to some of the most recent critique and anxiety in the community. They pulled out some of the different questions, some of the different concerns, not just coming from businesses, but also analysts as well. And what was nice about this is that they put up some of these sort of quotes on screen. I think they were a little bit filtered, let's be honest, because I think some of the feedback has been a little bit, let's say, direct. But nonetheless, it was actually good to see a recognition of this on stage and seeing all these different points sort of being responded to. And Ryan did something which I thought worked initially, but then as the keynote went on, I think actually started to sort of do the opposite thing. Essentially, he was talking about the fact that, look, none of the products are going anywhere. And they set up sort of the context to show you the whole ecosystem and how it comes together. But this culminated in a bit of a celebration about how our jobs are going to change with all these sort of different roles, sitting around the analyst. And I think this is an interesting one because I think Salesforce has a different description to the term analyst than I think we've been used in the Tableau community. In the Tableau community, when we talk about analysts, we really talk about what I would start to say are artisans, people who build dashboards, curate their data sources, and sort of manage that pipeline end to end. When Salesforce talks about analysts, it's a slightly broader definition going all the way back to business users who in the past in the Tableau community would have consumed content, but I think Salesforce considers them as part of the sort of forward-looking analyst community. And so this is a sort of really interesting framing that they had to do in this keynote. And this is, I think, where a little bit of disconnect starts to come into the picture with the Tableau community, because I think we do have that different understanding, especially if you're using the core products like Tableau Desktop, Tableau Prep, Tableau Server, and Tableau Cloud. We have a different understanding, a sort of a shared understanding of what an analyst is. And Salesforce is sort of recognizing that description, but broadening it out, because of course they have an interest in selling a product. And if you broaden out people you speak to, of course, you're going to sell more. So this is sort of a very deliberate attempt to sort of open up the arms of the community to say, hey, look, the definition of analyst is a lot broader than I think you've been used to. And we see all these different roles playing an important part in the ecosystem that we're building. Ryan sort of closed it off with this really bold statement, which is sort of saying, look, your jobs are transforming. So I always think this is very an interesting thing to do in a keynote, because I think everyone goes to conference to understand more about Tableau. But I think this was like a little bit of a provocation from Salesforce and Tableau just to say, hey, look, I know we're here to love the product, but listen, your jobs are changing. There's sort of different ways of reading that message. It was delivered in a much softer, sort of less direct tone, but I actually think sometimes when you see these slides and it's the only message on screen, there's a very deliberate point being made almost from the company back to you to say, hey, look, we know your jobs are changing. This is how it's going to look different. And it was both a point and also a message to the community at the same time. Maybe I've read a bit too much into that, but I always think, look, when you just have one message on screen, you're trying to make a point. That's a very deliberate choice. And the best way to make that message clear is to have that and only that on the screen. So I don't know if you felt the same way in the keynote, but I definitely think this was a message from Salesforce to us as a community, sort of telling us, look, things are going to change. And then we landed on the infamous slide, the mind the gap slide, where we basically talk about going from data rich and insights poor to agentic analytics and data driven. Now, this actual terms, data rich and insights poor, is a term that I know my good friend Ravi coined. And it's basically been taken and been used in the keynote as a really good way of highlighting sort of the real challenge. And I think it is a good way of sort of framing it. Now, this slide, I call this mind the gap slide. It turns up in every keynote for the last 5 years. It's such a classic Salesforce, let's say, device to say, you're here, this is where you want to head to. How do you get there? We'll bridge the gap. That's literally always the way this slide goes. I can't tell you how many times I've seen variations of this slide, different sort of mechanisms used, but it's always the same way. And I think at this conference, they just use this sort of idea of agentic analytics and data-driven AI with a bit of a Sandiego context on the right, given that we're a conference, and essentially talking about, look, we need to bridge this gap and we need to empower you with the tools in order to be able to do that. And then this sets up the products that we're going to cover in this keynote. Now, before they did this, they sort of put up this slide of the Tableau ecosystem, Tableau Desktop, Tableau Server, Tableau Cloud, and Tableau Prep. I was happy to see Tableau Prep there. If you go to the Tableau website and click down on the drop down for products, you won't see Tableau Prep there. I kind of thought maybe is this a subtle change to sort of change the ecosystem slowly and sort of move us to a slightly different way of looking at things. But it was good to see it called out here. And what they were doing here is really speaking to the audience in the room, saying, look, this is the Tableau we all love. As we as a community would say, this is the core product. This is what we've grown up with. This is what has made us, so many of us sort of really successful in the industry, but also we continue to do good and do impressive work with the tools we have today. And as we see improvements, that ability sort of keeps moving forward. But they very much wanted to make a bold point to say, look, all of those tools have a new addition. There's something called Tableau Next. If you haven't heard of it, that is going to become a core component of this ecosystem. So all these other tools Tableau Next joins that cohort of tools to make a new sort of product family suite. And this is really the first time I've seen them really position Tableau Next as a counterpart to the other tools rather than a replacement. And this is more of a correction of messaging in the past, because I think in the past it's been easy to look at the messaging and think, hey, I think they're about to replace Tableau with this. This is where we're going. They've always sort of talked about it as the future of Tableau. But I think that message has hit customers in a different way, and they're recognizing that. And so this whole point was really about making that message a lot clearer. And so after showing you the sort of core components of the Tableau Next ecosystem, going from things like the data layer, the semantic layer, and the action layer, they then put that message right back on screen to say, hey, look, Desktop, Server, Next, Tableau Cloud, and Tableau Prep, they all work together. They use this word of interoperability, which I think is an interesting sort of jargon word to use, but nonetheless, it was there on screen. And I think it told the message they needed to tell. The other products aren't going anywhere. Tableau Next is an addition. But I think this slide opens up more questions than in reality, because I think in working through some of this thinking, you then start to wonder, well, how on earth does Tableau Next work with Tableau Server? How on earth does Tableau Next work with Tableau Prep? How on earth does Tableau Next work with Tableau Cloud? And how does Tableau Next work with Tableau Desktop? There are connections, but I think when you start to drill into that question a little bit more, you actually find that this message is slightly disingenuous. It's not exactly as simple as this slide suggests. And even as someone who covers Tableau in a lot of depth, in the last month alone, some of this detail, some of this messaging has been changing. But of course, this is the keynote where they really talk about the year ahead. So I'll give them a little bit of leeway and say, hey, look, over this year, what I really want to see is an answer to this question. How do all these platforms truly work together? And another thing that I want to highlight here is there is a nuance to saying something like that. When we say interoperability, especially as data analysts, that really does specifically mean a set of things. And I'm not sure entirely that sometimes in Salesforce messaging, they understand that word. And by that, I mean making it easy to go from, let's say, Tableau Cloud to Tableau Next and not having to understand essentially a very complex ecosystem to do that. If I said to you today, I want to move a data source from Tableau Server to Tableau Cloud, you'd be able to tell me that the best way to do that is to use something like the Tableau Cloud Migration SDK to go get the asset from Tableau Server and put it on Tableau Cloud. Hear that question and I have a very clear response. With this capability, I still do not know how I would do that. And so that's why slides like this are great, but in practice, we need a lot more detail as to how it's actually going to work. And they finish this general point by showing, look, we don't just do this by showing you slides, we do it by showing investment in the community, in Tableau Server, and in other sort of areas. And they talked about potentially doing new and simplified pricing coming in the near future. They didn't actually announce what this would be, so I think we have to wait for a little while for this to mature. But what I will say, that if you go to the Tableau pricing page, there have been a ton of changes on the pricing page just over the last month, partly in design and communication, but also in the way the bundles come together and also in the naming of the little sort of, let's say, SKUs that you can buy. So I would highly urge you to pay attention to that page over the coming months as things change. And of course, I'm hoping that your account executives will tell you what to expect as well. That really closed out this section, and we went on to this final slide, which is saying, look, well, what does the future look like? And they really set up the Chief Product Officer, Sandiego, to talk about Tableau Next. And so what I'll say about this next session, I think it was the first time that I've seen a cohesive vision of the workflows that they intend you to do on Tableau Next. So let's go and have a chat about that. So this section was opened up by Sandiego. He basically talked to the product itself. He's the Chief Product Officer, and his role was really to nail this thing that I don't think Salesforce have nailed until this very keynote, which is to more clearly lay out what Tableau Next is and how it works and how all the different components come together to sort of speak to that. Now, what I want to do for this section is actually do a more deliberate breakdown of this entire workflow, because I think it's the first time we've actually seen this encapsulated workflow in a nutshell. In the past, what we have seen is exactly the same workflow, but without as clear a call out as to what the different components are. So to me, this was very much more a mature message about Tableau Next. I think we've had essentially 2 years of being told that something was coming. We're now in the phase where I think Salesforce need to deliver. And so what they did in this keynote is at least show a much more confident understanding of their own vision and a much more confident portrayal of how they expect you to use it, which I think was needed at this keynote. One of the key messages they needed a response. And in my honest view, I think they did nail it. Now, that's not to say that everyone's going to love this vision. I'll come on to the next bit a little bit later where we'll talk about the response to this. But needless to say, just take into account how people feel about it. I think this was a very clear representation of what Tableau Next is. Now, one of the things they did in this keynote is really lay this out. So I'm actually jumping ahead a little bit to show you the Tableau Next ecosystem in one place. Then I'll go back to the demo that they did. This was the slide they used to basically show you how the Tableau Next platform comes together. We've got the data layer, semantic layer, visualization, and action layer. And at the very top, you've got what I would call skills, Data Pro, Concierge, and Inspector. Now, if you're new to this channel, you won't have seen my videos where I've broken this down before. This is just a much more mature understanding of these. So go ahead and check out those videos. I've spent 10 minutes all the way to 2 hours breaking these down. So choose whichever format you want. I'll put a link in the description. But I think the other thing that was really good about this message was it was a more clear understanding of where the Tableau marketplace comes in. And I think they removed a lot of the clutter compared to what we've seen in the past. I'll put an image of sort of past breakdowns of this so you can just see what that looks like. But needless to say, I think this was a very good understanding of the platform portrayed. And then what they then did is they went through a demo showing you how the platform works. Now, the demo was contextualized into 2 halves. The first one was about accelerating analytical workflows. And then the second part was about driving better organizational outcomes. Now, again, I'm going to break this down as a separate video, but what I'll say is the first part where they were explaining the analyst workflow was super clear. I'll pull some screenshots of all the different components. And I think a few of the call outs that I'll make here is they had a very clear sort of lower 4/3, this little message that you see at the bottom, showing you exactly which part of the ecosystem you were seeing at any one time. And they were narrating you through the different workflows. They're literally explaining what the analyst was doing as they went through it. And I think they did it in a realistic sort of time frame. It was about like a 10-minute demo, but it did feel like you were going through the entire workflow in a very quick way. Obviously, these demos are nicely set up. And I think genuinely, for the first time, we were seeing a real product. We weren't just seeing sort of a Figma markup. The reason I'm saying this is because after the keynote, I went and spoke to a few product managers, and they actually showed me the thing working with all the bugs and everything going wrong, which of course wasn't sort of fully on display for customers. The things that people were seeing were a little bit more polished. But nonetheless, I saw the exact same thing working on people's laptops. So that also answers a critical feedback that I think I've been very public about, which is sometimes we see things that aren't necessarily finished products and they are visions, they're Figma mockups. But I think a lot more of what we saw was actually live in code as well and existed somewhere else in the sort of Salesforce org. So I'm not saying that everything in the keynote was actually a live version, but what I'm saying is that what we saw did exist in build somewhere else where you could see it. And so I'm always sort of on the fence about whether that's appropriate or not. Should you always show 100% polished things in a keynote? Sometimes live demos go wrong. And we did actually see that. There was a funny moment where Keyboard Maestro trial ran out during the middle of the keynote and you could see the presenter switch back and before. Really bad timing for that. So that's just a really good example to say, hey, look, this demo is real. But needless to say, I think there's still a lot of work to do in terms of just getting the product into the community's hands so they can see this workflow for themselves. Really try it out and see where the bugs are, where the edges are. It's one thing doing a created demo. It's another thing to let someone else drive that demo and bump into all the issues themselves. So we've still got that to do, but at least it was good to see this forward step. We were then joined by Rika Srivatsan, who is the Chief Marketing Officer at Tableau. She's only been in the role for literally maybe a couple of months, so she's very new to the Tableau ecosystem. This was really her first opportunity on the main stage talking to the community. I think this is a really important time as an executive. There's been a lot of sort of change in the Tableau executive team over the last, let's say, 3 years. There's been a lot of turnover as well. And with that comes a lot of ideas that come and go. So it was really, it's really important. These moments are, I think, more important than people recognize because it's the first opportunity for an executive to really sort of put their foot forward and maybe communicate their intent. And what was interesting about this next section is that Rika really drove this sort of connection between, look, this is how the platform works, but here's how it drives business decisions and business outcomes. So Rika very much became the customer as a CMO, as a mock CMO for this exact demo, even though she's actually the CMO of Tableau. And Southard, who's the Chief Product Officer, was explaining how the platform answers the key questions she should be interested in as a CMO. Now, I'm not going to do a breakdown of that. What I'll do is I'll do a separate video where I go through that in full. It's just it's a running demo. So really the only way to summarize that is just to watch that section. So I'll put a link to the keynote so you can go and watch it yourself. But I'll say, look, what I did like about this is I think it connected more clearly how Tableau Next responds to the customer message, to the messages that maybe CFOs, CIOs want to hear about how this platform really changes what they do. And it read really nicely into a customer demo and a customer sort of endorsement from Box, who's obviously a cloud storage company. I think there's a really nice connection between here's the platform, here's how it works, here's how it makes your workflow better, and then here's how actually a team, a company, has started to use some components of this ecosystem to change things. But there was one big but, and I'll come to it in a brief moment. Let me just set up this scene around Box. as well. So the demo from Box was really just more of a really big sort of endorsement around two ideas. Firstly, it was an endorsement around this direction, but it was also an endorsement of Tableau Pulse. And I think the marketing genius that got done here is that in certain parts of the video, we talked about Tableau Next as an ecosystem and a vision that's coming forward and the benefits it's perceived to have. But at the same time, it was mixed in with an actual endorsement of Tableau Pulse, which is already launched and people are using. So Michelle here was talking really boldly and cleverly about Tableau Pulse. But the real twist here was that Aaron Levy, CEO and co-founder of Box, was talking more about the future and how it behaves. And I noticed it in the keynote, but when Aaron and the team were talking about the future, they were talking about the perceived benefits. They haven't been realized, they were talking about them in the future tense. But when they talked about Tableau Pulse, they talked about them in the past sense, the realized sense. So the real marketing sort of genius here, maybe a little bit sort of deceptive, was that talking about the future, they were very clear as customers to say, we think this is going to be a good thing for us. And they were talking about the past, they were talking about real successes. But if you were in the keynote room and just watching it, it was very easy to just sort of miss that detail and just think of this as like, hey, look, this Tableau platform is working for us. But in actual fact, I don't generally think they've had access to the entire platform, the whole Tableau Next setup. So they couldn't really speak to that. And I think it was just an interesting thing to call out. I'm not sure I'm articulating it as clearly as possible. If you noticed it as well, let me know. But I think this was a really important point to call out. This customer message was a huge endorsement. It was an endorsement about something that I don't think they've genuinely tried yet. Or if they have, they haven't tried it in the full sense of the reality that we've just seen in the keynote, i.e. all the workflows coming together in one cohesive piece. But Box seems to be behind that message. And I think that was good to hear. Some customers are actually behind this change. They're going to push forward and make sure that they adopt it to see how it can change their workflows. And some of the opportunities they're talking about, they've actually seen in other parts of their business using AI and deploying it there. So culturally, they're a business that is using AI more widely, and Tableau being part of that ecosystem is a really important thing to them. So I just wanted to sort of, package that nicely and sort of make that super clear. They then ended this section around customers with a message around some of the customer success stories they've had. They pulled out a few customers, Box included, but also a couple of other companies with some notable ones. And this is a classic sort of marketing sort of play that Salesforce do. And actually, I think Tableau used to do in the past in a slightly different way. And so this was nice to see. To be honest with you, I think these are really important because sometimes we sort of look at some of these messaging from companies and these numbers, they're really hard to sometimes sort of put a logo behind. And for these companies to be happy to have their logos on stage in a keynote to tens of thousands of people, many more online, I think is a really important thing to see that there are some people doing this. And so as part of the executive track at conference, which I'm not part of, but I'm sure the discussions do focus around how is this sort of value realized and what are the metrics that are driving some of this. And that is a really important thing. And when you're working at an executive level and you're making these sort of decisions to get behind a platform, the value needs to be real and you need to be able to see the path to how to realize that value. So these slides don't just come together with like, finger in the air. There's a lot of attention and detail that goes into these numbers and making sure that every single number on these slides you can stand behind. And so if I had like a superpower, the one thing I'd love to do is to get all of these companies behind the table and just say, hey, can you break down how you've arrived at this number and show us how you've arrived at this match? Because I think that would be a great insight for the rest of the community. And we had Box do it, but I'd love to see some of the messages from other companies as well. So they then closed out this section with another reminder that, look, the Tableau we all love. And it's funny because in the previous slide, it was red, the sort of like warm color saying, look, this is change, this is coming, this is what we think. And then they ended up with this sort of green message. I always think these things are such deliberate choices, right? So we started at the beginning, anxiety, stress, change. Then we end at the end with green, calm, vision, all that stuff. So again, another really sort of subtle sort of mind game going on there. And it was sort of good to see this being called out. There was a nice call out to something called the Tableau Blueprint. Essentially, it's been enhanced to talk about the agentic analytics vision. And I think this needed a bit of change just to bring it up to speed with how organizations really change their culture and adapt it to sort of meet the challenges of the future. And it was really nice to sort of just see this laid out. They also announced the Tableau Community Slack. This is a great little touch. A long time ago, I made a video about how we needed a Slack for the community, a place for all of this to come together. Because frankly, I said at the time that, look, Twitter and all these platforms are great, but when something goes wrong with them, they're not our place. They're not our places to call home. And we saw this. Twitter has massively changed to the point where most of the community has migrated. And so all of that energy and time invested into that social platform as a communication place has completely disappeared. So now Salesforce is stepping in and they're offering a new Tableau community Slack. You can see the QR code on screen. Go ahead, scan it, join it. I'm on there. You can find me as Tableau Tim. Reach out to me, tag me. I'd love to talk to all of you. So go ahead and check it out. I think this is going to be a nice touch. I love Slack as a tool. It's much better than Microsoft Teams, and it's for a community tool. It's really nice, and it's better than something like Discord, which is more of a gaming focus. So many other companies do this, whether it's DBT, Databricks, all these other companies have something similar. So it's great to finally have something like this for Tableau that we can evolve and build over time. We then close this section out with a little feature on Harim Jung, who had a presentation about a data visualization she built. This is really, again, another call out to the Tableau community. I think this is a really nice touch. When you're an ambassador or a leader, you do a lot of good work, and sometimes it doesn't get the recognition it deserves. And so it was great to see Harim here getting her moment to shine and seeing that sort of positivity shine through, not just in her message, but also Salesforce's endorsement of the work she's doing. Now, we close off the keynote in, I think, a very strange way. It almost felt like they had to sort of just hit a couple of points. The first one of these points is just showing you the value they've delivered. So they use this term core to Tableau. Core always means like the Tableau we know and love. So they showed all of these different features that have been delivered. What I found interesting about this was that last year we saw a slide that showed something similar that said what was going to be delivered. This year we saw the same slide, but with a tick to say we have done this. What I was missing was a commitment about the next year. So this was nice to see. We said we've done, good to see this out. They've added a few items here, and I think I called this out in my pre-conference setup. But what I would have loved to see is these are the next set of features that we're going to deliver. Maybe that will come on Devs on Stage. Maybe that's been sort of split up for a good reason. I haven't seen Devs on Stage yet. I'm about to see it in the next 4 hours, so maybe I'll know by the time I'm editing this video. But nonetheless, they did call out, hey, look, if you want to keep adding to these ideas, go to the Community Exchange and you can add your idea on there. We then had a short plug for Hyperforce. Hyperforce is essentially Salesforce's technology to deploy Tableau Cloud and all these other great Salesforce capabilities in different locations around the world. Basically, think of this as a layer on top of AWS that allows them to deploy to different regions. And additionally, they also introduced Google Cloud Platform support for Tableau Server, Tableau Cloud. So if you want to run a Google Cloud Platform instead, you're going to be able to do that, which is a really nice touch. Now, I didn't see this coming, but at the very end, they ended on the point about Tableau Server with AI. And this is a really bizarre sort of twist because generally speaking, Tableau Server is great. And I know, server admins really love to see investments in Tableau Server because it's felt like all of that energy has gone into Tableau Cloud. But one of the biggest critiques I had was that, look, AI is something that everyone's doing. We shouldn't be leaving Tableau Server customers behind just because they run on-premise architecture. And I said, there is a way to get this to work with on-premise architecture. And so they kind of surprised me here by saying, hey, we've got Tableau Server with AI, and they showed a capability. It wasn't a great demo. The setup of the demo itself wasn't like a beautiful chart working nicely as we'd expected, but they did show the capability working. They showed essentially a little chat window inside of a dashboard running AI on Tableau Server. This was essentially the pitch. And they explained how it works by showing this diagram. How does AI for Tableau Server work? And this is actually very similar to the Einstein trust layer, but instead this is running on your own architecture. So I haven't seen the session of this. I haven't seen the detail around this. But my understanding, if I explain this diagram, is that you get a prompt, the user question coming in, you pick your LLM, so you can choose whatever LLM you want to choose, whether it's hosted in-house. There's a framework to access that LLM, so you've got LangChain, Llama Index, and Haystack. These allow you to essentially take your question and transport it using the VizQL Data Service API through published data sources to the LLM, and then it comes back with an output answer. So very much a way for Tableau Server to use AI to generate prompts and then answer questions essentially without needing Tableau Cloud. There's no capability of Tableau Cloud here. And this was really interesting because I thought to do this, they might need to send some data up to Tableau Cloud, but they've actually managed to, I think, show a solution that doesn't need that. So this is actually quite big because a lot of companies do have AI instances of, let's say, ChatGPT or Google Vertex inside of their organization. So being able to use Tableau Server combined with those capabilities could be a really nice addition to add this sort of question and answer capability to their dashboards. We then ended with a reminder of what's to come, True to the Core, an event tomorrow, which talks about the Tableau community, obviously Iron Viz, Devs on Stage, Data Night Out, and of course a call out to Dreamforce in the future. And of course, the next year, the conference will be in Sandiego again. So we kind of, in the keynote, we kind of got this sort of announced a little bit early, but nonetheless, we had a call out here to Dreamforce. As you can see, I'm just going to the end here to show you that Tableau conference will be in Sandiego next year on May the 5th to 7th. It's a little bit later. I appreciate that because having this conference right before the Easter break, not so ideal, but nonetheless, really good to see. Anyway, That's been my summary, a little bit longer than planned, but hey, we're here in San Diego. I'm sat in a slightly different setup, trying to do my best to summarize what was actually a long keynote as best as I can. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.